I'm Ms. Jackson coming to you with another video.
Okay, we're going to talk about graphing tangent functions with transformations, vertical stretch, shrink, shifts, horizontal stretch, shrink, shifts, and when the period changes. So my function is y equals 2 tan 2x minus power 4 plus 3. And what we want to do is identify our A, our B, our D, and we also want to know the horizontal shift, and then we'll go through the step-by-step process. So remember, your A is the coefficient of the tangent function, so A is 2. Your B is the coefficient of the x value in the argument, so B is 2. And then my vertical shift, we normally call this D, but D is 3. That's my vertical shift. And I need to find my horizontal shift. So remember, I need to factor this so I'll know what the horizontal shift is. So I am going to, and I'm actually going to work this out so you'll know what I'm doing. So I'm going to pull a 2 out in front of that x. So, and what you're really doing, I'm taking the 2 and I'm dividing by each term. So I have 2x divided by 2 minus power 4 divided by 2, and then plus the 3. So I'm going to show you because I want you to actually know how to factor this or a problem like this. So this is going to be 2, and then 2x divided by 2 will be the x, minus, remember, power 4 divided by 2, I'm just going to work it out, power 4. So keep power 4, change the division to multiplication, and reciprocate the 2, which is 1/2, plus 3. So I have y is equal to 2 tan of 2 times x minus pi over 8 plus 3. So I can actually find my horizontal shift now because it's easier to spot. So my horizontal shift is going to be pi over 8 units, and we're going to move the graph to the right. Remember, it's the opposite of the negative, which is moving to the right. All right, so that's how I got that. And then I need my period. So that might make, yeah, I'm going to find a period. So remember, the period of any tan graph is pi over the absolute value of B. And remember, B was 2, so that's pi over 2. So this is my period. All right. So now I got some information I may need to use when I'm actually working this problem out.
What?
All right. So we're going to start with step 1. In step 1, we are going to find the asymptotes. So what we're going to do, we're going to set the argument. So set the argument of the tangent function equal to pi over 2 and negative pi over 2. All right. So same thing we've been doing without a shift or whatever. So whatever that argument is, we're going to set it to pi over 2 and negative pi over 2 because we're trying to find the new asymptotes for this graph. So I have 2x minus power 4. Remember, that comes after the tangent function. All right, you don't put the plus 3 because the 3 is the vertical shift. All right, we're going to set that equal to negative pi over 2. And then we're going to take that expression again and set it equal to pi over 2. All right, so my goal is to solve for the x. So I'm going to add power 4 to both sides. So I have 2x is equal to negative pi over 2 plus power 4. I need to simplify that. Got to get the common denominator. So that would be 2x is equal to, so the common denominator is 4, so I need to multiply the first fraction by 2, the top and bottom by 2. And that'll give me negative 2 pi over 4. Negative 2 times negative pi is negative 2 pi, and 2 times 2 is 4. Plus pi over 4. Now I have the same denominator, so I get negative 2 pi plus pi is negative pi. All right, now I have to get rid of this 2, so I can divide both sides by 2. Normally I multiply by 1/2 by the reciprocal because I have a fraction on the right side. So I multiply this side by 1/2 and also multiply this side by 1/2. So 1/2 of 2 is 1, and 1 times x is x. And then I have negative pi times 1 is negative pi, and 4 times 2 is 8. So I have x is equal to negative pi over 8. Yes, and that's a lot of work, I know. And then I add pi over 4 plus pi over 4 to both sides. So I have 2x is equal to pi over 2 plus pi over 4. So again, I need to get a common denominator. And for this fraction, I need to multiply the first fraction by 2, the top and bottom. So I get 2 pi over 4 plus the pi over 4. So I have 2x is equal to 3 pi over 4. So again, I got to get rid of this 2 so I can get the x by itself. So I multiply both sides by 1/2. And I get x is equal to 3 pi over 8. All right, so my asymptotes are negative pi over 8 and 3 pi over 8. Okay, so I'm almost there. All right, step 2 is to find the period. Remember, the period of any tangent graph is pi over the absolute value of b. And that's pi over b was 2. So your period is pi over 2. And then step 3, we're going to divide the period by 4. And that's going to be pi over 2 divided by 4. And remember, we keep changing flip. So it's pi over 2 times 1/4. And that's going to be pi over 8. So this is going to be what we call the increment. And remember, the increment is used to find the angles for one period. Okay. All right, so I'm going to make this little number line here, and I'm going to find these angles. All right, so remember, my asymptotes go at the ends of this number line, negative pi over 8 and 3 pi over 8. And remember, you just need to find the angles in between. So my increment is what I'm adding. I'm adding is pi over 8. So negative pi over 8 plus pi over 8 is 0. Plus another pi over 8 will give me pi over 8. Plus another pi over 8 will give me 2 pi over 8. And if I add another pi over 8, I get 3 pi over 8. So I'm going to reduce this 2 pi over 8 to pi over 4. So my angles are negative pi over 8, 0, pi over 8, pi over 4, and 3 pi over 8. Okay, step 4 is to set up a table. So remember, your function is y equals 2 tan 2x minus pi over 4 plus 3. And your x values are negative pi over 8, 0 pi over 8, pi over 4, and 3 pi over 8. So I'm going to actually look at this function for a second. And if I just, for my second column in my table, if I just, okay, I'm not sure what I'm doing with this. Look at this part. Let me just get rid of that. Let's look at this part here. If I'm just looking at this tangent part right here, so I know that 2 is multiplied by all of this tangent stuff. and then a 3 is added. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my calculator to find tan of 2x minus power 4. So that's why I have tan of 2x minus power 4 in the table. So you're really just substituting each value of x into x. So it'll be tan of 2 times negative power 8 minus power 4. Well, since I'm doing it in the calculator, I'm just going to write the answers down. I know this first value is an asymptote, so you don't have to worry about the first value or the last value because these are asymptotes. So really all you're doing is substituting 0 power 8 and power 4 into this function. So when I substitute 0 in for 2, 0 in for x, I get 2 times 0, which is 0, minus power 4 is negative power 4. So I'm taking a tan of negative power 4. And remember, that's in the fourth quadrant, and that value is just negative 1. So I'm just going to put my values here, negative 1. Power over 8, if I plug that in, I should get 0. And if I plug in power 4, I should get 1. So normally, if you're looking just at the tan of the argument, then you should always get negative 101 for the tan of that. And then I'm looking at the function. I have to take whatever my values for the tan and multiply by 2. So I'm going to put in this next column that I'm multiplying by 2 each of those values. So that would be negative 1 times 2, and I can write this out. Negative 1 times 2 is going to give me negative 2. All right, and then 0 times 2 is going to give me 0, and 1 times 2 will give me 2. All right, so that takes care of that, multiplying that tangent function by 2. And then the last step, it says I need to add the vertical shift. So the vertical shift is 3. So I'm going to add 3 to all the values in the previous column. So for the previous column, I got negative 2. So I'm going to add negative 2 plus 3. That's going to give me 1. I'm going to add 0 plus 3. That's going to give me 3. And I'm going to add 2 plus 3. That's going to give me 5. So I'm plotting my angles, and I'm plotting this last column, the plus 3 column. And that'll take care of everything. So my graph is going to look something like this. All right, so I have negative pi over 8. I have 0. I have pi over 8. Pi over 4. And 3 pi over 8. All right, so at negative pi over 8, I should be at an asymptote here. Forgot about these. So forgot to plot my asymptotes first. And at 0, I should be at 1. All right, at pi over 8, I should be at 3. And at pi over 4, I should be at 5. So 4, 5. That's close enough. And then I'm just gonna kind of draw a line through my graph here. So it looks something similar to this. And I know this process was a long process, but this is how you get your answers, okay? Because you always need those angles, and when you take the tan of whatever that argument is and you substitute those angles in for x, you should always get negative 101 unless it's flipped. If there's a negative in front of that 2, in front of that 2 of the coefficient of the tangent, then the graph will flip going a different direction. Okay? And that's all. Yes, that's all.